In a quiet neighborhood where time moves slowly, two lives unexpectedly begin to intertwine. One seeking calm after years of holding everything together, the other searching for meaning beyond routine. What starts as simple conversation soon becomes a journey of truth, healing, and quiet connection beneath the steady glow of a porch light. It was late August, one of those humid nights when the air felt heavy enough to hold in your hands, the kind of evening where time seemed to slow, and every sound stretched a little longer than it should. I had left the back door open to invite in whatever breeze might wander through, though the air barely stirred. The faint buzz of crickets filled the silence between my thoughts as I washed the last of the dinner dishes. My house had been quiet for weeks since my son left for graduate school. His absence had a shape to it, a stillness that pressed in around the edges of my days. That's when I heard the footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate, unmistakably human. I turned off the faucet and listened. They paused, then two light knocks followed. For a moment I hesitated. Evening visitors were rare now. When I opened the door, Marcus stood there. He filled the frame, taller than I remembered, shoulders broad beneath a plain gray t-shirt. The porch light caught the edge of his jaw, and for a moment I saw both the boy I'd known and the man he'd become. "Evening, Clare," he said, his voice deeper, more grounded. In his hands he carried a covered dish, still radiating warmth. "My mom wanted me to drop this off for you." His mother had always been kind that way, sending over leftovers, checking in on me after my husband passed. It was her quiet way of caring without making a show of it. I smiled, taking the dish from him. "She's thoughtful as ever. Tell her thank you," he nodded, glancing past me into the house. "You've rearranged things," he said, though it wasn't true. The furniture was exactly as it had been for years. But the way he said it made me suddenly aware of the space, of the empty chair where my son used to sit, of how the silence seemed to hum. "Come in for a minute," I offered. He stepped inside, eyes sweeping the room like he was seeing it anew. Something about the air changed with him there. It might have been the way he stood, unhurried but certain. Or maybe it was me. My sudden awareness of another presence breaking through the quiet routine I'd built. We ended up in the living room. I poured lemonade, the kind I make fresh every few days out of habit, and handed him a glass. He took a slow sip, the condensation running down his fingers. "Still the best lemonade on the block?" he said, smiling. We talked about ordinary things, his new job at the engineering firm, the certification he was working toward, his uncertainty about where he was headed. There was something steady in his tone, a quiet seriousness that didn't belong to the boy I used to know. I found myself watching him closely, the way his hands moved when he spoke, the small pause before he smiled, the concentration in his gaze when he listened. Then, as the conversation drifted, he looked around the room and said softly, "It's different here than I remembered." I laughed under my breath. That's what happens when children leave home. The house expands. Gets quieter. He held my gaze a moment too long. "I don't think quiet is the right word for you. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly. It was too deliberate, too sincere. But the words settled into me differently than they should have." My pulse quickened in a way that startled me. I turned toward the window, pretending to adjust the curtain, though what I really needed was a breath. He went on, talking about growing up, about how strange it felt to see the neighborhood through adult eyes. I laughed at the memories, muddy shoes on my kitchen floor, the two boys eating popsicles on the back steps. But beneath the laughter, something new had taken root. A quiet awareness, a shift. When he rose to leave, I walked him to the door. The night air met us, thick and fragrant, the sound of crickets swelling again. "Good night, Clare," he said, meeting my eyes one last time. "Good night, Marcus." He stepped off the porch and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there long after he was gone, the dish still warm in my hands, the house behind me humming with silence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. Something had changed and I couldn't name it, but I knew it had begun. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The house was too quiet, too alive with memory. Every sound, the low hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the clock, the sigh of the air conditioner, seemed louder than usual, as if the walls themselves were listening. I lay awake, eyes tracing the faint patterns of light from the street lamp outside, replaying his words over and over in my mind. Not just as a neighbor, but as a woman. It had been such a simple sentence, and yet it felt as though it had unlocked a door inside me I hadn't even realized was closed. By the time the gray light of dawn crept through the curtains, I'd stopped trying to sleep. I slipped out of bed, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window, watching the street begin to stir. The air outside was damp and still. Somewhere a dog barked. The world looked ordinary again, as if the night before hadn't altered anything at all. But I felt different, sharper, awake in some new way. Then I heard the clang of metal. I leaned forward and saw Marcus across the street, crouched beside the gate in his mother's yard, a toolbox open beside him. The sight of him startled me, not because I hadn't expected to see him, but because some part of me had. He looked up and caught my gaze through the window. Without thinking, I stepped outside. "Morning," he called, standing and brushing off his jeans. "Morning," I replied, the word feeling strangely intimate. I crossed the yard, barefoot, coffee in hand. The grass was cool beneath my feet, and the scent of wet soil filled the air. "You're fixing the gate?" "Trying to," he said, smiling faintly. "It's been hanging crooked for months." "Figured it was time." I nodded toward my porch. "That light's been flickering for weeks," I said before I could stop myself. "I noticed," he said. "I could take a look at that too, if you'd like." The offer hung between us, practical, harmless, and yet it felt like something larger. Letting him cross that small boundary, letting him step into my space again, felt like a choice. The kind that meant something. "Come on through," I said quietly. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. I poured him a cup and set it on the table. He didn't sit until I did. A small gesture, but one that struck me. Respectful, unassuming. The radio on the counter was tuned somewhere between stations, filling the silence with soft static and the ghost of an old jazz tune. "I wasn't sure I'd see you today," I said. "I wasn't sure I should come by," he admitted, his eyes steady on mine. But I didn't want what I said to sit unspoken, like something I regretted. I turned the cup in my hands, watching the thin curl of steam rise between us. "You caught me off guard," I said softly. I didn't know how to respond. He nodded. "You don't have to respond. I just needed to tell the truth." His calmness unsettled me, not because it was bold, but because it was sincere. There was no manipulation, no performance, only presence. "I heard you," I said finally. "And I've been thinking about it. About what it means." He waited. He was good at that, waiting without pressing. "I respect your mother," I said. "And I respect myself. The world has a way of twisting things like this into something ugly." "I don't want that," he said quickly. "I don't need it to be a story for anyone else. Just a truth between two people." Something in his tone steadied me. I took a slow breath. "Then here's mine. If this ever moves forward, it happens in daylight. With honesty. No hiding, no shame. And if even one step feels wrong, to you, to me, to your family, it ends right there." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's fair. I'll add one more. If you ever feel like I'm asking you to be someone you're not, we stop before it becomes anything else." I looked at him across the table, the radio humming between us, and felt something rare. Not confusion, not fear, but calm. The kind that comes from being seen without demand. I didn't know what this was becoming, or if it would become anything at all. But as he rose to check the porch light, I realized I didn't feel guilty. I felt awake. The morning air was crisp and bright when we stepped outside. The neighborhood was beginning to stir. Lawn sprinklers ticking, the distant hum of a car engine starting, a neighbor walking her dog down the block. Everything looked the same as it always did, but I felt as though I were seeing it all through new eyes. Marcus walked beside me, hands in his pockets, the sleeves of his shirt rolled to his elbows. He didn't speak at first, and neither did I. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It had weight, but not the heavy kind, more like something waiting to be understood. We turned down a side street lined with old oaks whose branches arched overhead like a cathedral ceiling. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and sun-warmed earth. "I used to ride my bike down this street every day," Marcus said after a while. "I'd race your son to the corner and pretend the mailbox was a finish line," I smiled. "You two used to argue over who won, even when there wasn't a race," he laughed quietly. "We still argue about things like that. Some habits don't fade." There was something disarming about hearing him speak so easily, the traces of boyhood still in his tone but softened now by experience. The rhythm of our steps fell into sync, and for the first time, I realized how long it had been since I'd simply walked beside someone without having to fill the air with words. "When I was younger," he said, after a few moments of silence, "I thought respect meant never asking for too much. I thought it meant staying quiet so I wouldn't be misunderstood." He glanced at me, his expression thoughtful. "But I'm starting to think it means the opposite, wanting something in the right way, even if it's hard to say out loud." His honesty unsettled me, not because it was inappropriate, but because it carried no trace of game or performance. It was simply truth spoken plainly. "And what's the right way, Marcus?" I asked. He thought for a moment before answering. Openly, without pretending, without hiding in the dark. We turned the corner and came into view of my house again. The porch stood quiet in the sunlight, its light fixture still flickering weakly. "Then I suppose we start there," I said, nodding toward it. He climbed the steps first, setting down his toolbox. I watched him work, the easy precision of his hands, the focus in his face. He wasn't rushing to impress me. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who fixed things because they needed to be fixed. When he finally flipped the switch, the bulb glowed steady and warm. I smiled. "Look at that," I said. It remembered what it was supposed to do. He looked down from the ladder, grinning. I just reminded it. The moment was small, but it filled the air between us with something tender and real. We sat side by side on the steps afterward, each with a glass of lemonade, the light above us humming softly. I told him about the house, how it felt too large since my son had left, how I still cooked for two out of habit, how I sometimes caught myself turning to speak to no one. He listened without interrupting, eyes steady, posture relaxed but attentive. "My turn?" he said finally. I nodded. He told me about being 24 and feeling like everything was fine in a way that left him hollow. His job was fine. His friends were fine. His plans were fine. But fine feels like settling, he said. Like living a life you can explain to everyone but yourself. He paused then, glancing at the porch light. "Talking to you makes it feel different. Like maybe the things I want aren't impossible, just waiting for me to be honest about them." There was nothing performative in his words. They were careful, deliberate, weighted with meaning. My instinct was to deflect, to joke, to ease the moment back into something lighter. But I didn't. I stayed with it. "May I ask you something?" he said quietly. Yes, I said, though my voice came out softer than I intended. Can I hold your hand? Not because it changes anything, just because I want to honor what I said. I hesitated only a second before nodding. His hand reached for mine, warm, steady, unhurried. Our fingers intertwined naturally, like a memory finding its way back. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The street was quiet. A breeze lifted the edge of my hair, and somewhere down the block a wind chime trembled. The light above us burned steadily now, spilling a soft gold circle across the porch. I knew the world outside this small space would keep turning as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something that didn't need a name yet, only the dignity of acknowledgement. We sat there in that silence, two people who had decided for the first time in a long while to tell the truth. The days that followed unfolded quietly, the way ordinary days often do. Nothing grand announced itself, no great declarations or confessions. Yet beneath the rhythm of small routines, something had shifted, subtle, steady, unmistakable. I found myself noticing things I hadn't paid attention to in years. The way sunlight pooled in the hallway each morning, the faint hum of the porch light now burning with reliable steadiness, the texture of silence that felt less like loneliness and more like calm. Marcus and I didn't avoid each other, but we didn't chase moments either. They simply happened. On Saturday, I was in the yard trimming the basil that had outgrown its pot when I heard his familiar voice. "You're going to need bigger pots if you keep nurturing those like that," he called from across the fence. He was holding a bag of potting soil, a half smile on his face. "I brought reinforcements," I laughed, shaking my head. "You always show up right when I need something." "Just good timing," he said, setting the bag down. Or maybe I'm learning to listen better. We worked side by side, replanting the herbs, our hands dusted with earth. The air smelled of damp soil and lemon leaves. It felt simple, grounded, like a scene borrowed from another life, one without rush or expectation. When our fingers brushed in the soil, neither of us pulled away. The gesture wasn't charged, just human. The quiet acknowledgement of two people existing comfortably in the same moment. When we finished, we sat on the porch again with glasses of lemonade, the same ritual that had somehow become ours. "You know," I said, "it's strange how the smallest things start to mean the most. A porch light, a gate, a pot of basil," he smiled. "Maybe that's where the truth hides. In the things that don't ask for attention." He told me about his work again, how some days felt like progress, others like standing still. He spoke about trying to figure out what kind of man he wanted to be, the kind who built things that lasted, or the kind who chased what felt alive. I told him about the years I'd spent trying to hold everything together, my marriage, my son's childhood, my own composure, and how strange it felt to be allowed to let something grow at its own pace again. The afternoon sunlight spilled across the porch steps, and for a while, neither of us spoke. We just sat in it, two people sharing the same slow rhythm of thought. There was no need to define what was happening, no urge to name it. It didn't need to fit into a shape that others could understand. He looked at me then, his tone careful, steady. "I don't need this to be more than it is right now. I just want it to be real." "And it is," I said softly. "That's what matters," he nodded. I used to think love was supposed to feel like lightning, loud, sudden, impossible to miss. But maybe it's more like this. Quiet, steady, the kind that doesn't ask you to run, just to stay. I didn't respond right away. My heart was too full of something calm and unfamiliar, a kind of peace that didn't depend on promises. "You might be right," I said at last. As the day drew toward evening, he rose to leave. The porch light hummed above us, its glow stretching long shadows across the yard. "The light's holding steady," he said, glancing up at it. "So are we," I replied before I could stop myself. He smiled, and that was enough. After he left, I stayed on the porch, the scent of earth still clinging to my hands. The neighborhood settled into its usual hush, the faint music from a passing car, the murmur of voices carried on the wind. Life continued being itself, simple and unhurried. I realized then that what we were building wasn't something fragile or secret. It wasn't about hiding or explaining. It was about choosing to exist in the open, to let things grow under the same sunlight as everything else. What we had was not a confession whispered in darkness, but a conversation that could stand in daylight. That night, as I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I didn't feel the ache of emptiness. The house no longer felt like it was expanding to swallow me whole. It felt lived in again, awake, as if something inside it, and inside me, had quietly decided to return. Sunday mornings had always been slow for me, a time for quiet rituals. The hum of the kettle, the soft crackle of toast, the faint rhythm of a radio murmuring in the background. It was the one day of the week I allowed myself to linger, to move without purpose. But this Sunday felt different. The air carried that light, golden stillness that comes before the world truly wakes, and with it, an unspoken anticipation. I stood by the kitchen window, coffee warming my hands, watching the street bathe in early light. Across the way, Marcus's truck was parked at an angle, door still open. He was loading something into the back, planks of wood, a small toolbox, and a bag of nails. When he noticed me watching, he waved, an easy grin crossing his face. "Morning," he called when I stepped outside. "Going somewhere?" I asked. "Not far," he said. "Thought I'd fix the old bench in your yard. The one that's been leaning for months." I glanced at the weathered bench beneath the oak tree, half swallowed by ivy. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said, lifting the toolbox with one hand. "That's why I want to." Something in his tone made me pause. It wasn't flirtation or obligation. It was care, simple and unadorned. The kind that speaks louder than any confession. I joined him outside as he worked. The rhythmic tap of his hammer echoed softly against the morning air. Each strike seemed to settle something inside me, like the world was being made steady one nail at a time. I sat nearby, sipping my coffee, watching him move with quiet concentration. "You're good at this," I said after a while. He smiled without looking up. "My father taught me when I was a kid. Said fixing things teaches you patience. You can't rush wood. It splinters if you force it." I studied the curve of his shoulders, the deliberate calm in his movements. There was something grounding about him, something that made the world feel slower, safer. "Did he ever say what to do when something's already broken?" He paused, setting down the hammer. "He said not everything's meant to be fixed. Some things are meant to be understood." That stayed with me. I thought about my own past. The pieces of my life I had spent years trying to repair, patching over cracks that were never meant to hold. Maybe understanding was the gentler choice. When the bench was finished, we sat on it together, side by side. The wood creaked softly under our weight, but it held. The oak above us shifted in the wind, sunlight flickering through the leaves in restless patterns. "I used to sit here with my son," I said quietly. "We'd eat popsicles after dinner, and he'd talk about what he wanted to be when he grew up. Some days it was a pilot, some days an artist." Marcus smiled. "And what did you want to be?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't think I ever really asked myself that," I admitted. "I was too busy being what everyone needed." He turned slightly toward me. "Maybe it's not too late to ask." The breeze carried the scent of earth and sun-warmed grass. His words hung there, gentle but insistent, like an invitation I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. I didn't answer, but I didn't look away either. After a moment, he reached out, brushing a stray leaf from my sleeve. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it lingered. No words, no promises, just presence. When he finally stood to leave, the bench gleamed in the sunlight, sturdy and whole again. "It should last a while now," he said. "So should we," I replied softly, surprising myself. He smiled, that quiet kind of smile that doesn't need translation, and nodded before heading back to his truck. I watched him go, the sound of his footsteps fading into the hum of the morning. Later, as I sat alone on the newly mended bench, I realized what that morning had given me. It wasn't romance or even certainty. It was space. Space to breathe, to begin again, to ask questions I had long buried beneath years of noise. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of what might come next. The world didn't feel heavy or hollow. It felt open. And in that openness, I felt something returning. Not the past, not what had been lost, but a quiet belief that there was still something beautiful left to build.